Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Joel Elston here. Today is Thursday, July the 12th, 2018, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, your first daily dose of happy for the day. And we hope your day's off to a happy day. And, actually, I've been thinking the last few days how really important it is to get that first thing going in the day as best as we can make it in terms of our approach to it, our attitude. Because, Joel, you and I talk about all the time how important the attitude is. Attitude is everything. And so when we start the day feeling good, looking for what's going right, looking for all the stuff that's going well in our lives, well, the first thing we notice is how much of it there is. There's actually a whole lot that goes right. The number of things that goes wrong compared to the number of things that goes right is really high. But secondly, when we look at all this stuff, we realize that our mind starts to shift and our attitude starts to shift and our feelings start to shift. And when that happens, all kinds of good things happen, which of course is the basis of our podcast. But I just like to remind everybody that this is a good life. Good things are happening, right?
And that's such a great perspective. I mentioned a couple right before the show started. There's things that are going to happen, and part of life is that, and not being in control and not being in. There's a lot of stuff that's out of my control, but the one thing that remains squarely in my corner, in my control, and it's the basis of the law of attraction, is my perspective. It's my thought. And when I'm coming with that from a positive, upbeat, happy type mentality, then that literally programs my emotions to attract the same thing. That's sort of the thought attraction, the vibration that goes with that. So, things will happen. You can't expect, this concept that there's going to be a perfect life. What you can expect is you're in charge of how you respond to that. And that's such a difficult difference for people to understand. I'll hear people say, well, I'm thinking positive and still bad things happen. I said, yes, it's you're missing the point if you think that it's not, things aren't going to happen. So again, there's so much more good stuff, but the bad stuff is on alert. We're on cruise control. When you drive to work on a day, most people don't remember the drive into work. You didn't have a wreck. You didn't run out of gas. You didn't, so many things didn't happen that it's uneventful. So when something does happen, there's a flag that somehow, oh my God, this is, this happened. Well, we've done a show together now for years. I don't know how many shows you and I have done together.
A lot of them.
Multiple shows. Yeah.
Multiples, yes.
So, yeah. So out of all the shows we've done, I could think of one or two. We've had various formats in which we've recorded it. I can think of one or two shows that we were unable to do them due to technical difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Out of all the shows we've done, I cannot remember all the good shows. There have been a bunch, but the ones that we weren't able to complete because of a format change, not format, but the way we're doing it, the platform which we're using was not stable. They're very few. The vast majority, statistically, almost 100% of the shows we've done have gone off without a hitch. But again, we could focus on that, or we could focus on the occasional times we've had a problem. So you see the difference in the way you look at it. Every time we do the show, we don't sit there and worry about, oh boy, I hope this can go off today. That's not what we do. We're used to it. And you do a lot more shows now with our other hosts as well. And the majority of those shows go off without a hitch. And that's just how you're choosing to look at things.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I had forgotten that we had a time where stuff was going wrong. And you're right, there were some shows that it just went wrong. I completely blanked that out of my mind. Which to me is like the best evidence of all that what you focus on becomes your dominant experience. Literally, I'd forgotten about them. They were not part of my. I want to thank you very much for bringing them back to my awareness, Joel.
Well, I thought I'd deliver that message to you.
That's right. Yeah.
If you're listening live, the show cuts off in about 5 minutes. You're going to understand the whole thing. I know that one of the things that I realize is what your focus is in life is actually that becomes your reality. And I had a very difficult time for a long period of my life when I was in a horrible spiral downward from a gambling addiction, and my family, they were most affected by it. They were my quote unquote victims of my addiction more than anyone else. And my dad and I were estranged for a while, and in a sense that it wasn't his fault, it was mine. My behavior was, and he really wouldn't have much to do with me. Well, that's been over 20, almost 30 years ago. And my dad has, he's doing well, but his memory's starting to fade a little bit. Well, that part of our life has been deleted from he just doesn't remember it. He doesn't understand it. And things are, and I'm glad he doesn't. But the point is, his reality is just not part of his memory anymore. It's not a real thing because so much focus has been on what my life looks like today. And that's, that really is, because he told my sister when I said, your brother just is amazing. How did he start doing what he's doing? How did he get here? And my sister was like, well, Dad, he had an addiction to gambling, and he started, and that led to all this chain of it. Really? And it was just, she was just couldn't believe that, it was like one of the biggest traumatic events in our family. And he's like, I don't remember that. And, wow. And so his reality has been literally altered. So this is a beautiful thing that can happen. His has some memory issues attached to it, but his reality is much different. We get to program that in. What goes wrong is a small part in our life versus what goes right. But if you focus on what's going wrong, or you believe you're cursed, or you all these things, then yes, you are. It isn't anything but your perspective, and that's what happens. The ideas that go through your mind, starting out today like we're doing, on a positive, upbeat note, looking, laughing, getting out of our own way. There's a chemical change in the brain when you do that. There's new stuff that starts happening in the brain. Better, I guess there's not better or worse chemicals, but more positive chemicals are released. The stuff that sort of uplifts when you start laughing and having a happy start to your day. And that dictates the whole mindset of the day for many people. And it's easy to fall back into the negative, anticipate more negative, or you can keep moving forward. Say, things are going really well. It's been a great week for me. And it has. And a lot of that has to do with my perspective. It's been, something that I'm so ingrained to. I just am not anticipating the negative, and when something negative does come along, I have no doubt. It's just I can deal with it. That's the beautiful part of all this.
It is. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And that the incredible thing is your father, certainly he has memory issues, and we understand that. But nevertheless, what he's experienced is not outside of the norm. I mean, yes, I can remember, now that you pointed it out, thank you very much. I can remember the times that we had technical issues, but they aren't a part of my life anymore. So they're not in my conscious awareness. I have to think back like, oh yeah, they really did happen in order to bring them back. That's how effectively I have been able to put them in the past. And in doing so, I no longer live in them, which is the real gift. That's the beautiful thing right there.
Yeah. It is, and that for years, part of, and I think a lot of people, I think it's fair to say that many people are drawn to the law of attraction, often for financial reasons. Is often why many people start looking at it as, because of the Think and Grow Rich. Bob Proctor is a practitioner of the law of attraction that's very focused on financial gain. There's a lot of them out there with that. That's sort of the lead story for the law of attraction for many people. Well, and it was a piece of a strong attraction to it for me in the beginning. Is much more than that now. But there was a time where I grew up where my mom was a single mom. She eventually married my dad, and she always had a very weird relationship with money, very fearful of being broke, and she was broke quite a bit. I inherited a lot of that. And then having a gambling addiction, money is a big issue, lack of money. And then, so I really lived in a constant state of lack involving money. And over the years, the law of attraction has changed that. I don't feel that way anymore. I don't attract a lack of money. I have plenty of money and I have all I need to pay. And I don't say that arrogantly. I pay all my bills and I don't worry about it. And the more I don't worry about it, the more the money comes in. Well, here's a great example. but it's easy to fall back into the patterns, the old brainwave patterns that take place. Last week, I was expecting one of my consulting checks I was waiting for a large check to come in, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but they mailed it. And so they sent me an email that your check has been mailed. Well, after about 3 or 4 days, there was no check. And I got up and looked and said, okay, it's no big deal. I didn't need the check to pay any bills, but I was anticipating that money. And I found myself, I said, worst case scenario, if it doesn't come in a couple of weeks, I'll contact the company and they'll issue me. It's no big deal. Just let it go. And I get an email almost within, I don't know, an hour of thinking that. They sent me another email saying, we apologize. It was printed, the stamp was put on it, but nobody put it in the mailbox. It's going out today. And it was, but I felt myself finding that anxiety, that familiar thought from the past. I reminded myself of that. And again, the check wasn't even relevant. It has nothing to do with me paying my mortgage or my office rent or any of that stuff. It has nothing to do with anything. It's other than just having additional money. And I appreciate additional money, of course, but it's not a driving force. I have plenty. And so you see the connection of when you've been through something, while you're away from it, it can become a very easy track back. And that's what happens with a lot of people with the law of attraction. They move forward with it. But when something doesn't match that immediate narrative, that lack of whatever comes back in, and that's what drives them.
Oh yeah, lack is probably our number 2 enemy. I think our number 1 enemy is, in a sense, ourselves. Another way to say it is our own resistance, our own unwillingness. As amazing as this is, it still continues to blow my mind. It's so easy for us to resist the things we want the most. We are really good at it, and we are very creative too. I mean, whenever I unearth, like I discover, oh, here's another resistance point that I didn't know I have. The first thing I notice is, I didn't know I had that. Why is it that with all these resistance points, I didn't know I had them? And then they pop up. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? But it was there all along. We are so good at resisting. We've gotten so good at it, we don't even know we're doing it.
Yes. Well, it's built in, and it's sort of the basis of where most people get stuck. A behavior that is based in resistance or expecting, that I keep doing the same behavior and then the same things keep happening. I'm shocked by that. In reality, it's resistance that keeps you from moving forward. I have a friend who posted a few weeks ago on Facebook. It was a very vague post, but it probably was because of a lack of relationship in his life that was driving the post. And my response was, well, if you keep searching for someone in the same place you keep searching and can't find, your resistance is the willingness to change. And it doesn't, you can see it in other people so much easier than you can see it in yourself.
Oh yeah.
That's the frustrating part.
Yeah.
It's easy to point out, well, here you are, here's where you're stuck. No, I don't see it that way. Well, of course you're stuck. And, that's something that I'm hoping that our audience can learn is identifying your own resistance is the opening of changing that. Eventually it goes away. Eventually you learn not to resist and not get stuck on one course of action. And I believe that if I just adjust it a little bit, why don't you try something new? And ironically, Walt, when I was waiting on the check, that I was, once I did that, not only did they call and tell me the check was being mailed, they offered to overnight it to me. I go, no, just send it normal mail. I'm good. Well, I often will bill. I send out email statements and I do a lot of phone sessions and people have 30 days to pay, and I never have any problem with people paying. Well, ironically, and again, law of attraction I had probably 10 statements out, and they usually trickle in 1 or 2 a day or whatever. I had like 7 of them pay that day. And it just at one time, so it was a larger amount of money than that check was going to be anyway. It's just an amazing feeling when you can live in that positive and how you're attracting more. And that's what I love about it is being in control of your thought process. Then eventually in a roundabout way, has a direct effect on the reality of your life. Controlling your perspective has a direct effect on your reality. And that's just, I keep using the word exciting and amazing. I don't want to oversell that, but it really is. It's what drives me to do this I'm not a victim of life. I can live my life and I have control. I'm 100% successful in dealing with whatever has come my way. And it's likely I will continue to have that same success rate.
It's funny, as you're talking about the levels of resistance we have that we don't know about and how it's so much easier to see it in others. I was thinking about a situation with one of Louise's gardening customers. Overwhelmingly, our customers are very happy with the work that we do. And I mean, we're proud of that. We get good results. We get good feedback. Our word of mouth around the Valley is just fabulous. I mean, we get people saying, "Oh yeah, I got referred to you. Who'd you refer? Who referred you? Oh, I don't know, but they said you were wonderful." Like, oh, well, that's nice. I mean, how do you react to that? You don't even know who it is that they were talking to, right? But there's an example of how, when you get good things going, good things happen. And yet, even in that, we still occasionally get a customer who, they complain about a bill, they complain about a service, something didn't work right. Occasionally we make a mistake and we fix the mistake, but most often it's mostly the customer themselves. I mean, I can think of one that we're dealing with right now who I don't know their entire story. I've never had a long conversation with either of them. It's a couple, an older couple. But right now they're saying, well, why are we paying so much more than we did last year? And I look at the records and they aren't. I mean, the difference between what they're paying last year and what they're paying this year is so minimal that I'm wondering, well, what's the bee they got in their bonnet? Because it doesn't make sense. And the response they're giving is, oh, no, we're paying like $2,000 or $3,000 more than we did last year. And I'm thinking, no, you're not. So clearly here's somebody who has got themselves in some way on some kind of a negative tack, and they're kind of spinning out of control. Well, we could easily spin out of control on that too. It would be very, very easy to do.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we all do that, right? It's all very possible. And that's literally the same thing as what you were talking about with your story of the check. You could have spun out of control about that. It would have been very easy to do.
Sure.
But you chose not to. You chose to say, this is all going to iron itself out. And when you took that attitude, all of a sudden you got a phone call saying, hey, we're sorry, we didn't put the check in the mail.
Yeah. And it wouldn't matter. I mean, and that's exactly right. It would not matter one way or another which way we did this. I mean, it's the direction that you view an event happening can affect your day, and you see that. I see that, like the gentleman that was talking about paying more, $2,000 more dollars. Again, his perspective, while it's not accurate, is his reality at this point.
Right.
So I remember when I was in my dad's insurance business, one of the fascinating things that, every time your car insurance comes up for renewal, it is more than likely that it went up. I mean, it's just how it worked, it might be $20 or it might be $100, but it always went up. Inflation goes up, the cost of insurance, it's just how it works. So,
And in this case, in the case of this particular customer, they are paying about $400 so far this year than they did last year, but they've also asked for a whole lot more services. So it's not like it wasn't even inflation; it's just they got more done.
Right. Well, exactly, and I look at it from the perspective of back when I was in the insurance business, and probably 20% of my calls we would answer the phone. I want to know how come my insurance keeps coming up. I just can't keep affording this. I'm on a fixed income.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that like every day for.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
And after a while, I became resentful. I'm like, well, your electric bill went up. Gas went up. This went up. This went up. Everything goes up. Your insurance is going to. But I didn't have the foresight that I have today. But their perspective is based on an awfulizing technique of, everything's going up. I'm not going to be able to afford things. I'm just not going to be able to. And the concept that I'm on a quote unquote fixed income it supports the theory that I'm trapped on the amount of money I have, but everything in my world keeps going up, and I'm eventually going to run out of money. That's where all that comes from. And at the time you don't realize it. It's a fear-based thing versus first of all, if you're on a fixed income, often they will have inflationary safeguards in place for that. If not, there's other things you can do, and most of the time you have enough money to make it. But again, everything becomes how you choose to look at it. And so his reality, even though he's getting more services, and even though it's just shocking to him that he's paying all this much money more, and it creates his narrative, and that's his reality. It's sad because it versus, I'm grateful for my service. My lawn care service, I think, went up $20 this a month this year. And I'm like, well, I don't care. It's reasonable. It's very reasonable. It's, and I'll hear from people, a lot of it has to do with how it's presented. The fact that somebody said, yeah, our costs went up and we're getting busier and we have this. And so we're going to be like, I'm fine with that. So we look through it through a certain lens, and that lens determines how we see it. It's, I'm grateful that I'm not having, these people are very dependable. They're neighbors of mine. They do great work in the yard. I know if I needed something extra, if I needed them to come down here and meet the sprinkler fix guy or whatever, there's stuff like that they would do for us. So there's value in that for me. And that's, I think as humans, that's what we got to look at is we're in charge of the perspective. The perspective eventually dictates our reality. So yes, they're paying more or they're getting more value. They get to look at it either way. They're choosing the side based in lack. And that's what drives all this.
You told a story on Facebook through one of your posts in the last day or two about a client who was awfulizing everything and basically talking about all the things that were going to go wrong and how bad things would be and that they're never going to get better. And you said to him, yeah, you're right. I love the dialogue, the way you posted it, because you were basically confirming all his worst fears and saying, wait a minute, you're not supposed to tell me that.
Yeah. He was shocked. It was a really good session. And he was telling me everything that was going wrong. And he said, in one of his statements, if I remember correctly, I was placed on, very dramatic. I was placed on this earth to suffer.
Oh dear.
And I was like, yes, you were. And he looked at me like, what? Do you believe that? And then he, his next, and I eventually went through the process with him. I go, my answer eventually became, what I believe is irrelevant. What you believe is everything, and you believe you're here to suffer. Suffer on, man. Just keep doing it.
That's right.
Continue to suffer, and it really turned out to be a really good session because that becomes that acceptance piece. One of the underlying things that we touch on almost weekly is the victimization, the self-victimization of life is destroying us and we're in a helpless mode. And again, through a therapy standpoint, I have witnessed the industry change so much to actually support that concept. And it's fascinating to me to see the professionals and reinforcing that with people a lot of times of through the belief they're helping trauma. In reality, it's actually helping a victimized mentality, and not that, as I say every week, trauma is a real thing, and there is things that can be done about it. But at some point, there needs to be a move on from trauma part of let trauma become a strengthening agent, and the events of trauma strengthen you. And a lot of people just will not buy into that. So there's a lot of narrative out there that I am really in danger now because none of this is my fault, and I'm a victim of my own life, and nothing can ever get better. And that's a scary way to live. I've lived in that, and it's a scary way to live because there is no hope from that perspective.
So if you get somebody, and this takes us right to the topic that we put on for the show today, when you get to the point where you're having a conversation with somebody, particularly a client, but it could also be somebody you're talking to on Facebook or on the phone or just somebody you see in the street or you saw them at the gym or whatever, and they finally recognize to some degree that yes, there's at least something going on within themselves that they haven't noticed before. When they ask you, what do you do? What do you answer?
Well, again, everything's so individually based. A lot of it's walking them through the acceptance pieces where they look at it, when you can get people to identify, this is what I'm doing. Here's what I'm mentally doing to myself. I am inviting this type thought process, and it becomes sort of I have tons of exercise based on the individual, but this young man, not everybody can handle the yes, you are cursed, and just I'll just leave that there for a second. I'm cursed. Yes, you are, and that's a startling thing. There's no hope with that, and I let them. Well, I thought I'm here to get help, and you're telling me there's no help, and I'm like, there's no help if you're believing that. You're right. However, there is another side to it, but I got to get you to walk there with me. This awfulizing technique, if they can start seeing where their power exists, and a lot of times I'll use minimal victory techniques, meaning get something done today, take action, have an action of victory, something very small sometimes. Sometimes it simply is writing one thing you're grateful for right now. Let's do that. One thing, and that might be the technique that gets them going. But I have to give them a victory. I have to allow them to have a victory, and when they can do that, that starts that momentum. We use the term spiral, either upwards or downwards. Stopping the spiral becomes step one, then the downward spiral, and then beginning the upward spiral is sort of step two. And you do that by looking at what's right in your life, looking at the abundance in your life. There are so much more things going on in your life better. I had a client 2 weeks ago, really nice guy. He called me very frustrated. My battery's out of my car. Everything goes wrong for me. I'm not going to be able to make my appointment. I'm going, how old's your car? And he goes, 4 years old. I said, well, that's about right for a battery. I said, so you're telling me every day for 4 years your car started, and the one day that the battery died is everything goes wrong? And he laughed. He goes, well, I get. I said, so you have multiple days of car starting, no problem. This is the first problem you have. And in reality, if you had been proactive and realized, wait a minute, I got a 4-year-old car, let's have the battery at least checked,
Mm-hmm.
And so the helping people see that, because again, the flags that come up when something goes wrong, we're on cruise control when things are going right. We have become so accustomed to things going right. When things go wrong, they stand out. One of the, and this isn't a real positive, but I just want to use an example. I'll pull it around, I promise. Every day in America, there are, I forget, X number of people that die in a car accident. It's very common. 99% of them don't even make the local news. It might be a blip in the paper, but they certainly don't make national news.
Right.
It's just, car wrecks happen. There could be an airline crash somewhere on the other side of the world, and 100 people could die in an airplane crash, and there's cameras there. You would believe that, oh my gosh, airlines are they're just ridiculously dangerous. Look how many people died. Well, in that day alone, in some states, that many people died. And this is a worldwide event that it's flying so much safer, but because we take everything for safety and stuff for granted, or we take certain negatives for granted, certain number of people are going to die driving cars. We could just accept that. However, let's 100 people die on a plane, and we freak out because, again, it's all about a perspective. Flying is just hands above, far and way above driving as far as safety goes. It's just not even a question. But you see the comparison versus there's between 1 million and 3 million people on any given day are flying just in the United States alone. And again, 99% of those days, 99.9% of those days, nothing happens.
Right.
But we are so conditioned to look at what is wrong. That takes me back to my, the redundancy of my talk every week about turning off the news. It's the highlight of what's going wrong. Let's scour the globe and find the most distressing thing to happen, and then we're going to have a panel of pundits argue about it and talk about how bad it is versus the millions and millions of things that are going right every day. But they don't make the news because it doesn't sell. It doesn't. We have become a society of negative thinkers that are scanning what is wrong versus just living in the extreme of what is right.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point because the fact is the news doesn't exist in order to mind control us. The news is a reflection of what we're already thinking, and that it shows up all over the place. There's a great example that showed up in the last week on Facebook. Very often, there's a law of attraction group that I participate in because it gets a lot of traffic, a lot of people talking. So it's an interesting group to be a part of. But as with anything else, you get a lot of people who join the group who really don't know a whole lot about LOA, and sometimes their questions are a little bit offbeat, or sometimes just plain wacky. Sometimes they bring up stuff that makes it really clear they really don't understand how the whole thing works. And one of the most common examples of that is somebody who will post some story, an awfulization story, to use your words, about how some terrible thing is going on, and they will get dozens and dozens of sympathy comments and likes and supports and so forth on that. You can get 50, 80, 100, 150 people commenting and liking and sharing sympathy and all that kind of stuff. And then this past week, we had a story about 12 young Thai football players, soccer players, who they and their coach got trapped in a cave for almost 3 weeks. They were almost given up for dead at one point. They were discovered alive at the very last moment. Supplies were got to them, and then it was the next week or so trying to figure out how to get them out, and they finally got them out, and they got them all out. It was a major positive news story. I posted that story in the group. You know what reaction that the group gave to that? They gave it 29 likes, and about 4 comments. Now, you post a story, you post something about how somebody is depressed about their life, and you get huge amounts of commenting and huge amounts of liking. And then you post like the major positive news story of the quarter, and it gets 29 likes.
Yeah.
If that doesn't illustrate just how negative the mindset of most people is, I don't know what does.
Yeah, and that's sort of the point as we move forward. I've mentioned to you before, I have actually gotten out of most of those groups because they are, and again, I don't want to be negative myself and discuss it, but most of them are missing the point. And the majority of your posts are why the law of attraction is not working for me, and then the other or what's going wrong in my life, and then they're seeking support. And it's more of a lot of people go into it as more of a therapy group attempt than it is an actual attempt to really, really turn things around and understand the law of attraction.
Yeah, actually, what they want is They don't even want real therapy. They want dysfunctional therapy. They want therapy that says, everything, you don't have to change anything, but everything's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. And, it just happened again. Well, stuff happens. And, there's never actually any dealing with it. There's no actually addressing the root of it. Just that a good therapist would go a lot farther than what happens in a group. No, this is just dysfunctional. Everything's fine. No worries. Ugh, please.
Yeah. And that becomes the concept, and it's frustrating. And you find yourself engaging in I found myself getting frustrated with them not understanding the law of attraction, and I realized most people in those groups are trying to learn. If there's an advanced group of LOA today people,
AOL, LOA,
stuck in 1995.
That's
there.
Right. Yeah.
When I look at it from just that incredible perspective of where life is at, and then other people aren't matching that or not understanding that what they're inviting it just becomes frustrating. So I see people struggling with it, just like you're saying. You posted what is just an incredible story, just to me, just the most awesome story that's out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
We have so many good things going on. It's just such an exciting time, and but no, we got to focus on. Just a few likes with that, and that's the point of it. If we were to filter our world with, the country, our country was really watching that. That is one story I followed online.
Me too. Yeah.
And I followed it. Elon Musk actually built a little sub. Now it wasn't used,
Right.
but
Yeah.
they sent it over there. So it's like it got everybody's attention. One man passed away rescuing these boys, and it was such and so you have all of these people, and just rallying to save these kids, and that's so exciting to me that we all cared that much.
Yes. Oh yeah. I don't know about you. I literally, as I started following the story, I had this feeling inside of certainty. I didn't know how, but I was certain they were going to get out. And if I looked at that feeling, I said, I don't know where that's coming from. But there's just, it's like I see all of this positive response. I mean, the news media was trying to make it as negative as possible. But you look at the comments that people were leaving on the news articles and what they were saying about it on Facebook and what they were passing around in the various other social media and the Twitter accounts and so forth. It was all about hoping and praying and feeling good. And come on, here's another idea. Maybe we can do this. Maybe we can do it. Everybody was on these really positive tracks in terms of helping these kids. I saw that, and in my mind, there was no way they weren't going to get out. It was just impossible for them to get permanently trapped there.
Well, and I heard of a few people questioning, well, why was this coach putting them in such dangerous position? Why? And to the story's credit, or whoever I was reading this about, somebody said, look, let's worry about that later. These boys are in a cave. Let's work on getting them out. We'll worry about all the. You're talking about a bunch of boys. They're adventurous. I don't want them to be scared. I want them to realize, hey, and let's don't get trapped again. But at the same time, let's not give up our sense of adventure. It's a great story, and I hope one day they can use that on what a positive was. So this is a really good example of something, how we respond to these boys and how their families respond to these boys and how society responds to these boys will determine, and how these boys respond to this event will determine whether this event was a trauma or an incredible adventure.
And largely, it looks like it's going to be positive. I mean, even when it was happening, one of the few pieces of good news that came out was that the parents of the boys were sending messages once they made contact in the cave and they were trying to figure out how to extract them. They were sending messages to the coach saying, please don't blame yourself for this. We don't blame you. So there may have been other people out there who were, but the parents weren't. If the parents aren't, why is anybody else?
Right, and so we can make it. Events happen, and that response is such an important factor. I've used the example in this show before that I had the unique perspective of seeing two separate clients at two separate times. It's amazing that this happened. They both had identical circumstances happen across the country. They both had their home burned to the ground. They both lost everything. When I say everything, lost all their physical belongings, personal belongings. Right. But nobody was injured, and nobody even lost a pet.
Wow.
So one of them viewed. They both were insured. So one of them viewed it as just he was in therapy for the trauma of the loss of everything.
Mm-hmm.
The other dude was like, I made a fortune on insurance. I need my house to burn every year. He said, I made more money on my house burning than I did the whole year working. So he looked at it from I got all new stuff. He actually views the house burning and nobody being hurt. It's just, really, he said that really sort of gave me a boost. I moved to another town. I got a better job. I've had money to do some things I wanted to do. So the other guy was just like, oh God, I could have been in the house. He kept looking at what could have gone wrong. But none of it did, but what could have gone wrong. And that's such a great example, Walt. That's such what drives, when these boys went through a trauma, or they went through an adventure, and their perspective will dictate which one. And that's what I'm hoping. And it sounds like you're saying that everybody is rallying and just pointing out, you guys are awesome. You're survivors. You're resilient. You need to be doing TV commercials about resilience and strength. And maybe they're believing, wow, we are really tough. Or God, that was so terrifying. Look, I'm not going to be able to sleep for the rest of my life. Again, so much of it is how you program your response to it, and that, and cue the therapists that are going to be like, oh my God, Joel, you don't understand trauma. You don't understand what happened. I hear that a lot. And I'm not minimalizing how bad trauma is. It certainly is. It really is. But your response to it still remains in your control. And that's the piece that, is being lost. And so I'm so excited, these young men. I just can't wait to see what they do with their lives. I hope we follow them, and I'd love to interview some of them one day and ask, how do they see this? What was their perspective? I'm sure there'll be a book written on it. I can't wait to read it.
Probably, yeah.
I hope it's written from a perspective that I would write it from,
right.
Of just wow, you guys are awesome. And I would, I was thinking the other day, it's funny you said that, if I could get hold of them and ask them all to write their story from their perspective.
Wouldn't that be great?
Each one, all 12 of them. And then, just see where it's at. But I saw a picture of them in the hospital. They're all smiling, they're all waving. And I'm thinking, wow, this is what a feel good story.
Oh yeah.
And
very good story.
Yeah.
So I take when we put the topic together, I took it as usual from one of your posts that it was a meme that you had shared. The question that was asked in the post is, when people ask, what do you do? Answer whatever it takes. And the only modification I would make to it is I would answer whatever it takes to take control of your perspective. Because that's really what it takes.
And that, yeah. Whatever it takes, and that becomes that answer, and that's exactly how I filled in the blank in my mind. Is whatever it takes. I'm not looking at I do whatever it takes when I'm control. My perspective to flip it is what I have to do. And the perfect example that sort of covers that is when I look at, okay, I had the worst thing that can happen to a human being in my mind is the death of a child. And I lost my son, TJ, and that was a horribly difficult time, as you can imagine. That's a huge understatement, as you know, how I've went through that. However, again, what am I going to do with that? What am I going to, tell his story of strength and his story of resilience and what an incredible journey he had in his short life and how much joy he brought to my life? That's a story. That's how I view it. That's my story of it all. Or what a horrible loss. And again, it's of course a horrible loss, but I can live in the loss. My life is void because my son is gone. And I can live with either perspective that I want. And again, if you knew my son, he would not be accepting of me doing anything other than what I'm doing. He would want me to. He was full of energy, full of just positive vibration, and just he was the least. He was the most resilient human I've ever met in my life, and I'm inspired by my son. That's what I choose to be, and that's the power we all have, Walt. If you lose your job, that's traumatic for many people. It's either the biggest loss or the greatest perspective. And I'm thinking off the top of my head, so I'll probably mess this up. So I'll give you a heads up.
Okay.
But you're more of a music guy than him, so you'll help me out with this.
Okay.
You'll fill in the blank.
No problem.
The Beatle, the original Beatle that was fired.
Pete Best.
There was yes. He was fired before the Beatles were a huge success. I don't know his name, so we'll call him the fired.
He was Pete Best. That was his name, Pete Best.
Pete Best.
He was a drummer.
Pete Best was fired, and for years, and I've read the story on him for years. Pete Best lived in the shadow of the Beatles. Their success was phenomenal. It literally cost him $1 billion in life.
Oh yeah.
Just a fortune he lost out on. Fame he lost out. Just so much he lost out. And he lived for a long time depressed and drinking of what he lost. But over the years, he found a new life. He started playing clubs. He's still, in the last I read, I don't know if he's still around, but the story was about the back half of his life where he was doing really well. He was happy. He was telling stories. I think he wrote a book even, and he loved his family, and he had an anonymity that he never would have had. And with success, he turned that into a positive. But for years, he lived with being an ex-Beatle was a huge negative. It was an incredible loss.
Yeah.
But he then flipped the script himself and turned his life around. And the way he tells the story, and I think he had a better life than most of the Beatles had. It feels like to me because, again, his perspective changed.
Oh yeah, I would agree, and I think the Beatles would actually agree, especially when they were still touring, because their touring years was a nightmare for them. I mean, it was great for their fans, but for them it was just a horrible nightmare. It was one nightmarish day after another, and they were doing their best to maintain a positive perspective. They actually did pretty well, I thought, considering with their attitudes throughout all that stuff. But they were just going through a horrible time.
Yeah, one of my friends is, and I don't mention names and stuff, and I don't know what. He's a relatively famous person, and getting more and more famous as time goes on. And one of the things that we will talk about occasionally is, and we talk 2 or 3 times a year, just catching up. Really, really good person, and really successful right now.
That's great.
And so, I'm like, my goodness, I mean, everything you're touching is turning to gold. I'm so happy for you. And he said, yeah. He said, but I tell you what, Joel, he said, I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful for everything. He said, but it does wear on you. He said, I can't just walk down to the store.
Yeah.
I'm not able to, he said, I always have to be on. He said, I just want to have a dinner by myself sometime, but everybody wants to get it. So he has food brought in, and he said, I'm not complaining. He said, but there's a side of all this that not everyone's aware.
Yeah.
And he said, so he said, I love what I'm doing. I'm just blessed to be what I'm doing. And just so excited how all this is unfolding. But there is a side to it that I have to adjust my perspective. And he said, and that's when he usually wants to call and talk to me of, just perspective adjusting. And from anybody's point of view, they'd go, oh my God, this guy has the best life ever. And he does. He says, I do. Mm-hmm. But there is a side to it there is a advantage to being, if you're Warren Buffett, for example, you have a ton of wealth. And while a lot of people will recognize you, you could probably go to the store outside of where you live, and he's just some gentleman most people wouldn't recognize just in random.
Right.
It's just that, so he's enjoying both sides. A lot of time with great wealth, famous people become famous, and then that's what drives them. So you get to choose no matter where you're at. Everything that's happening is great, but at the same time, you don't want to live in that. There's a young man that I've worked with before that was a former child superstar, pinup guy. I don't know what he called it. Teen Idol is the word I'm looking for.
Oh, right.
And he's now almost 29 years of age. He's just nobody wants to hear his concerts. He's just freaked out that, it's all fun. He just feels he's the ultimate victim of the world. And while he probably had a childhood most people would just dream of having, his childhood actually led to an adulthood full of lack. He is incredibly negative. He's battled mental illness and drug addiction, and still does. And it's just because I have not been successful in getting him to move on to that next phase of his life. He still is just stuck on wanting to be the famous 12-year-old that everybody in the world just runs around, all the girls screaming, and now he's a 30-year-old man that is just not appealing to an audience, and he can't accept that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it just shows how important perspective is, and to give you kind of another view, here's a really famous story. You won't necessarily recognize it at first, but you'll recognize it eventually. Back in 1960, which was before the Soviet hockey craziness kind of got started. That was when the U.S. won the gold medal in the Olympics in 1960. And there was a guy who had made the team that year who just before they went to the games, he got cut from the team. And he was devastated. And he went home and watched the Olympics on television. And when they won the gold medal, his father turned to him, true story, turned to him and said, well, looks like they kicked the wrong guy off the team, or the right guy off the team because they won the gold medal. It was like a real kick in the teeth for this guy. Well, this guy refused to get beaten down by it. He could have taken the same route as the rock star the 12-year-old, the 12-year-old star who had a miserable perspective after that. But he chose not to take that perspective. Instead, he watched over the next, what was it, 4 or 5 Olympics while the Russians just dominated. They just steamrolled the competition. And he watched and watched, and he said, you know what? Somebody's going to beat them someday. The guy's name was Herb Brooks. And in 1980, he led a bunch of college kids who didn't have a prayer in the world to the greatest U.S. hockey victory in history, the Miracle on Ice.
Yeah. The recovery, when you understand, you get knocked down, and if you allow that event to strengthen you, great things happen. Great things are out there. I believe him being cut for his team, it created a manifestation of what happened in 1980. He turned it around. That was 1980, and today, when you talk with anybody who knows sports, it is still referred to as the greatest upset in the history of sports.
It
period.
is, yeah.
With not even discussed as a second. It is just that big that they could have played that game 1,000 times, and the Soviet Union would have won 999.
Pretty much, yeah.
They were that dominant.
They
on
were.
paper, it didn't look possible.
Yeah.
This is a group of professional players, which back then the Soviet Union literally trained year round. That was their goal, to win the Olympics, to look big, to look great. They were using all kind of performance enhancing drugs. They had the ultimate training methods. They weren't allowed a real social life. And these were grown men playing a bunch of college kids.
And a couple of them were some of the best players ever. I mean, Tretiak was probably the greatest hockey goalie in history. He was an amazing player, just absolutely incredible.
Right.
And I can't remember what the forward's name was. He was like the premier player in the world, bar none. I mean, way above any of the U.S. hockey professionals. He was that good. I can't remember what his name was, but yeah, just amazing how good these guys were.
So, but again, that's the stories to me. Those are the stories that illustrate with the resilience of the human spirit, the value of the law of attraction. It is not being defeated. Life will deliver heavy blows. And if you allow them, those blows will actually put you in the right direction of success, or it could destroy you. And the person that's in charge of that is you. That's the piece that when I realized that is when my life turned on a dime. It turned in a whole different direction, because that is me now. Stuff has happened, horrible. And a lot of it's my fault. A lot of it wasn't my fault, but it doesn't matter. Here we are today. Allow it to strengthen you. Our audience is, they're all different walks of life. They're listening. There's people who are struggling with just multiple issues. There's people that are really getting the law of attraction. I have great feedback from the people that listen. But that's the key point behind this. It isn't about where you're at today. It's about where this can lead you. The traumas, the disappointments, the frustrations are opportunities. They're new growth. There's other things that are out there. If you're still breathing, you still have that opportunity. And this hockey guy lost everything. What was his name? Herb?
Herb Brooks, yeah.
Yeah. When your own dad's taunting you, that you got fired and think it's a good thing, there's not a lot of, but he didn't allow it to defeat him. And that's what I love, the resilience of people who can see beyond that immediacy. And that's what excites me. Those are my favorite people to be around. Those are the ones that have an incredible energy about them that realize, no, I'm not. So whatever, what do you do? Whatever it takes to change that mindset, whatever it takes to be successful, we're going to do it. I don't mind rolling up my sleeves and doing hard work. I don't mind. Yeah, I have one of my clients is a professional that has a very odd schedule, and it rotates, and we talk every week. One time we'll talk at 10 o'clock at night. And then the next week we have a 7 o'clock in the morning appointment, and we rotate back and forth between doing that. And, people are going, oh my goodness, I want to accommodate my client. I'm willing to do that. have to do it. It's not a money thing that drives me to do it. I love what I do. It's something that the fact I'm willing to do that. I'll take whatever steps that are reasonable and necessary to be the support I need to be for my clients. So that's how I view it. It's a gift to be able to do what I do. And so I treat it very seriously, and I treat it like, I didn't end up here by mistake. This was all, it all happened, and I responded to it in a way that I'm excited about. And that's the hope that I hope every week that we bring to the audience, or every day that our my colleagues on the show bring, is this spectrum of hope and resilience. And it's never too late, and you're not cursed unless you believe you're cursed. And that is everything.
It is everything. And for those who perhaps are recent subscribers who have recently subscribed and haven't been listening for years like some of the others have, I urge you to check out Joel's book, The Bench. He's got some other books he's writing now, but the one that's been published for a while is The Bench. It will tell you a story of resilience like you have never seen before. It will open your eyes and make you realize that when you look at your own stuff that's going on, man, none of it measures up. This is minor compared to what Joel went through. And Joel, you went through a lot of hell, but boy, you just rose from the ashes like the phoenix. It's just incredible. And so, I mean, like, how'd you do it? Okay, let's go back to the original question. How do you do it? How did you do it?
It's a process of change of perspective is all it is. It's a pretty difficult question to answer with 3 minutes left.
Yeah, show, right. Sorry.
But it starts with a change of perspective. It starts with a belief that this can get better, and we don't have to keep getting worse. It doesn't have to. Miracles happen when you do the work. Miracles happen when you change your perspective. Are they miracles, or are they just change your perspective? We could debate that all day. But it really is. If you had told me, we're coming up on my anniversary. It was August 17th of 1995 that I first got into recovery, and so we're coming up on my anniversary of that, and it changed everything for me. It's when all that changed. And it started with, after a lot of contemplation, am I willing to pretty much change everything about me, which really meant just changing my mindset. That is, I didn't know that at the time. I thought I still thought I was cursed. I still thought I would never do it. But if you would have told me the life that I have today, all these years later, and what I have going on, there was not a plausible path to see that happen. There wasn't. It would be a fairy tale to think that I would be having the life I have now. It happened in increments, and the more I started believing, and then I know there's no limits now. It just keeps growing. I don't know where it's heading next, but it certainly keeps bringing new stuff and great opportunities every day. And that's the energy I try to put out to the clients, to my clients and to our audience. Is there is no end. If you're still breathing, you're still in the game. You woke up today. We're here. There's new opportunities. You find it. Anybody can do this, but there's no one immune to gravity, and there's no one immune to the law of attraction. It's just how you're choosing to use each.
Yeah, that's a great message, a fabulous message. One last message I want to leave with our listeners before we finish this episode today. I mentioned people who are recent subscribers, but if you're not yet a subscriber, please do take the time to subscribe now. I mean, you can just tell from this episode just how powerful all these messages are that come through every single day, twice a day, actually, during the work week. And it's so easy to do. You just go to the homepage at loatoday.net. The instructions are right there. It literally takes about a minute, maybe 2 minutes if you need to download an app for playing podcasts. And then you're done. And now all these wonderful stories and all these wonderful episodes come to your phone every day, and you can play them whenever you want to. Joel, I'm so glad we got a chance to do this, and I'm glad that you do it once a week with me. Thank you for doing it. I look forward to doing it next week, and I hope you have a great week.
You too, Walt. I love it, and can't wait to speak again next week.
And we will invite you all back next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.